unexpectedly, in the midst of the month of February, we find ourselves in the midst of a health crisis, a safety crisis, people fearing, behaving in ways they normally behave, fearing that infrastructure and safety protocols will not suffice, and that we're all in danger as we proceed through our routine behaviors. I could be talking about coronavirus, but I'm not. Bear with me. I'm talking about 10 years ago, 2010. So I graduated seminary in 2008. My wife graduated seminary in 2009. We were engaged to be married when she graduated seminary, and so we began to plan for our life together. And so one aspect of that planning involved transportation. And so I had a Toyota Camry. We still have a Toyota Camry. And when Annie graduated from seminary, we knew that even though we were not yet married, even though she did not yet have a job, we knew we needed 2 cars. And so I began to investigate what kind of vehicle would be the most reliable investment. And so I read consumer reports, I explored different options, and I came to the conclusion that buying another Toyota would be the most reliable decision. But sidebar, I bought a 1993 red Jeep Wrangler when I was 17 years old. And I had that Jeep Wrangler when I bought Annie a Toyota Corolla. I actually traded in my 1993 red Jeep Wrangler. You remember the Cash for Clunkers program? I traded in my 93 Wrangler for the Corolla. You know, you meet a woman and you decide you like her, and things start to get serious, and then you get engaged and things get really serious. But when you trade in your 1993 red Jeep Wrangler, things are serious. You're really in love. So we bought a Toyota Corolla, and sure enough, within a short time, there is this hysteria of safety, because if you recall 10 years ago, there was this recall hysteria for Toyota vehicles. At first, they thought it was a mat on the driver's side that would get the accelerator stuck. And then they thought it was the accelerator. And then everyone was scared going about their routine lives on the highway, scared about their own vehicles, scared about Toyotas next to them, scared that what they thought was safe was no longer safe. You know, as people, we live, I live, my operative theology too often is that if I read enough consumer reports, if I do enough research, if I save my resources and invest them wisely, then I can control the variables in my life. I can control the variables in my family's life. And so when that infrastructure breaks down, when the consumer reports don't work, it's like the foundation got pulled out. It's like the rug got pulled out from under us. I remember this hysteria 10 years ago about Toyotas. It almost sounds silly now, right? Wasn't silly then. Brings me to our first lesson from Genesis. Most of us, if we attended Sunday school as a child, we've heard this story ad nauseum. And we're in Genesis 2, one of 2 creation accounts in Genesis. And we hear this story of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of this tree that God tells them they cannot eat. I love St. Augustine. We are an Augustinian church, and St. Augustine, who took this story and much theology from this story and talked about original sin. I would love to take St. Augustine to lunch and banter with St. Augustine with aspects of original sin that strike me as true and other aspects that strike me as less true. And so I offer you this morning that in this second chapter of Genesis, a story that most of us are familiar with, that sometimes we can use Eve as a scapegoat. Sometimes we can interpolate ideas that aren't there. I argue strongly that Adam and Eve in this reading are acting like 19-month-old children. They're acting like my daughter Francie, who's 19 months old. So Francie doesn't really know, certainly doesn't comprehend what right or wrong is. In fact, if Francie were here right now and I said, Francie, don't touch the font, without hesitation, without a thought in her mind, she would bolt that font, and then she would touch it, and then she would turn back to me to see my reaction. Am I smiling? Am I not smiling? If I then took Francie and I put her in timeout, she would probably giggle. We've tried this, because she's not yet fully aware of what right or wrong means. She's not fully aware of what that means for her. Her sisters, her older sisters, would be egging her on. They know right and wrong. But Francie doesn't know yet. Having children has changed for me, this story of Genesis changed for me what original sins means for me, because none of my three daughters, on the day they were born, did I see any sin, any brokenness in their eyes. I saw nothing but love and beauty and holiness. Fade out, fade in 2.5 years, I see plenty of brokenness. I see plenty of individual energy to push away. Part of the human experience after birth is pushing away as we find who we are. Pushing away from our parents, pushing away from our siblings, pushing away from our origins, pushing away from God as we fumble through life, as we fumble and try to discover who we are and what that means. That, for me, is what this second chapter of Genesis means. This idea that we as humans fall into the myth, the trap, that we can control the world, that we can control our lives, that if we study hard enough, if we do enough research, if we have enough peer-edited citations, that we can understand all of the world, we can make it safe and whole. We think we can be God. And we should strive to be better. We should strive to make the world safer. But there's hubris in thinking the end result can come from our discovery. Going back to this Toyota Corolla I bought for Annie, I'll note that the Camry is still in the parking lot. It's still running. The difference between being a child of God and being a product in America, we're not products, we're people. As people, though, we come off of the assembly line broken. We buy a car and we expect everything to work. And then if it doesn't work, we bring it back to the dealership and they fix it. As human beings, we come off of the assembly line broken and imperfect. We come off the assembly line dangerous. We come off the assembly line with terrible consumer reports. Lent is about turning back to God and saying, we need a recall. We need to go back to that God that knows, redeems, and sustains us. We need to remember that God that created us, that God that knows us, that God that loves us, and remind ourselves that not only do we not know everything or can know everything, but there is great comfort and safety in being human and not having to be in charge of it all. I recommend for you, this is a book by John Philip Newell, who actually was on our campus just a few days ago giving a presentation for Still Point. John Philip Newell is a Celtic Christianity writer, and he writes in this book of reversing the idea. He uses the image of a cathedral spire, which is that conical-shaped architectural piece that you see in cathedrals. And he talks about how, if you talk to scientists, particularly physicists, as they get more into the detail and grandeur of creation, how they no longer start questioning whether there is a God because the beauty and majesty of creation is so monumental that they see it. And so he talks about reversing the human lens of that. He says, we live at the end of an era. As Robert Johnson says, the symbol of up needs to change to down. We need a new mythology. If we are to retain our spires, as symbols that point to the otherness of God, we need at the same time to develop symbols that point to the withness of God. As well as the upward spires, we need something like downward spires, vessels that hold the holy rather than simply pointing away to the holy. We need to create or reclaim images like the holy wells, he's talking about wells, that lie beneath the very foundations of many of our medieval cathedrals, to remind us that the deeper we move into the mystery of matter, the closer we come to the one from whom all things are born. Meister Eckhart in the 14th century held this tension and balance when he said that height and depth are the same thing. Transcendence and immanence belong together. The one who is beyond us is at the same time the very ground of our being. I would argue we strive to understand the particularities of creation to make things safer, to make things more efficient, to make things better, and to know God better. The spiritual mentors I have in my life are all much older than me and have taught me, and I'm slowly learning, have taught me to go within as you age, to go within in order to find the particularity of God in the world and the complexity of God. That is what Lent is about. That is what we are about. And so with all love and faith and appreciation for each and every one of you, I want to say that you came off the conveyor belt broken. You need a recall. I need a recall. On the highways of life, you and I can be terribly dangerous. We can hurt people, particularly when we think we can control all of life. I invite you to a God that created you, a God that sustains you, a God that redeemed you. Turn yourself in with me for a recall this Lent, if you have not already, to a God that already is waiting with open arms, grace given, undeserved, a God that loves you, redeems you, and can sustain you and us as we strive for a better world. Amen.